Hello and welcome to NASTAR for Recruitment's webcast on the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR as it's affectionately known. Today we're going to go over some practical steps for recruiters on dealing with GDPR. My name is Guy, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at NASTAR, and with me today is Guy Dieterding, Managing Director of the NASTAR Recruitment Division. Hello Guy.
Hi, Geese. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm very good. This GDPR subject is a bit hairy, isn't it, to be talking about on a Wednesday afternoon? It's one that's taken me by surprise. I'd read a bit about it, but what is it, Guy? I've not really read too much into it. Tell us a bit about this
Well,
GDPR and why everyone's in a furore about
yeah, I mean, it is a bit hairy, you're right. And I think one of the problems is it's been, the Data Protection Act or the Data Protection Regulations or Directive, as they used to be called, has been around for a long time. And recruiters have successfully ignored it because it was literally just a directive and there was no real comeuppance if you failed to adhere. It was just seen as best practice. Having said that, one or two people have been taken to task over it, but nothing serious. But what is happening, effective May next year, 2018, is that this becomes law, and so it's no longer a directive. It's no longer best practice. It's a legal requirement, and alongside that, some pretty significant fines have been put
Have
in
we made
place.
an
So
error on this slide here, Guy? I'm seeing 20 million. That must be an error on the slide, right? Surely.
no, it's not. No, I'm afraid it's not. 20 million euros. I mean,
20 million
whether the
euros, Guy. That's, or 4%.
or if it's more, 4% of global turnover. So if you're a big global business, that's turnover. That's not profit.
That's
That
horrific.
is a real slap.
That's a real spank, isn't it? If you get caught
It
breaking this
certainly is.
regulation. Wow. That's incredible, Guy. And is
Um,
there any way we can wriggle out of this? I mean, Brexit's coming. You know,
Yeah, it's nothing to do with Brexit. I mean, it is, and that's the other thing I think that's allowed people to take their eye off it a bit because it was originally named as the EU General Data Protection Regulation, and it was something put forward by the EU. But the UK have separately agreed to bring it into law on that same date, whether we are part of the EU or not. So it will cover all of the data that relates to people in the UK or anywhere else in the EU, effectively.
wow. That's incredible. Such
Um,
huge
and and
fines
by
bound
personal
into
data,
UK
I'm
law.
not just talking about candidates, but candidates' employees. So any business that holds employee information, I don't think employee is a big concern because just by being an employee, you are giving a company a certain um, ability to hold information because you have an employment contract with them. But it does mean that you have to be very careful about what information you hold on an employee. So if you want to hold the fact that they are Caribbean descent or their religion or anything like that, you have to have the specific okay from the employee to do that because you don't need that information in order to have them as an employee.
Consent.
Clearly, you can and should hold their date of birth or their NI number or their bank account details because you have to have that in order to fulfill the employment contract. Anything you're holding outside that, you really need to be a bit careful of. For recruiters, the biggie is candidates because there are so many recruiters out there with candidate databases. They're built up over 10, 15, 20 years. They have 100,000 candidates. They have 200,000 candidates. They have 300,000 candidates. And a chunk of those they will have spoken to recently. A lot of them they will not have spoken to for many years. And this law is going to affect every single candidate that you have on your database.
That's incredible. So this isn't something you can ignore. It's not something that's going to go away. It's bound by UK law, and it carries a heavy penalty if you get caught infringing it. This is something serious, guys. It's definitely hairy. That's for sure. Um, what does
It
the
is.
new law require? What's required of us? What do we have to do so we don't get hit with that huge fine there, Guy?
I mean, it's not actually by legal standard. It's not actually that complicated. But I have seen a number of articles on LinkedIn and elsewhere by legal companies typically, which run to 6, 7, 8 pages, and you think, goodness, there's a lot in there. I mean, essentially there are half a dozen absolutely key points that recruiters need to be aware of, and probably the biggest is that any personal data you hold, so that's any information that you hold on a candidate that allows a candidate to be identified, requires explicit consent from the candidate. And by explicit, that means you have to prove that the candidate has actually given you consent, not just given you the data. So gone are the days of stripping information off LinkedIn and thinking, oh, well, that's all right, I'll put that on the database. You won't be able to do that unless the candidate has said, yes, Mr. Recruiter, you can hold my information. And at any point, they can say, I'd like you to remove that now, and you've got 7 days to comply. So that's the big difference, is in the good old days, if you could find the data out there, you could bung it in your database and hold it forever without anyone really coming knocking. That has gone away. And if at any point a candidate comes to you and says, you've got to take me off, this is the classic right to be forgotten. When it was first talked about, there were a lot of concerns around the internet in general. If I want to be able to withdraw every picture of me, how can I effectively exact my right to be forgotten to Facebook or whoever it is, because they've got to go through and remove them all. For a recruiter, if a candidate comes to you or anyone who you have data on, whether it's an ex-employee, and they say, please remove me from your database, you have to do that. You have to comply, and you have to demonstrate that you've done it. The other things which may be a little less of a problem, but they will certainly require a little bit of a change in how we approach taking candidates on, is that the data must be freely given rather than under duress. So what that really means is you cannot say, look, unless you give me this information, I'm not going to provide this service. So any personal information that you are given has got to be freely given and or required for that specific service. You can't say to someone, look, if you don't provide me with your date of birth, or you don't provide me with a piece of information that's not essential, we won't provide you that service. And it has to be requested in clear and plain language and asked for in a standalone fashion. So that effectively is stopping people sharing personal details. The good old days of you sign up with a service and suddenly you start getting emails from 37 other companies with whom they have shared your details. Gone. Not allowed to do that anymore. You must have that explicit consent from the candidate for that service. So you can no longer share information with sister companies or anything like that. So those are pretty key in terms of the way we add candidates to a database and how we manage their information.
Wow, that's huge, Guy. I mean, the power is suddenly in the consumer's hands as far as their data is concerned, or in this case, the candidate's hands. And
it is, and that's what privacy law is all about, really.
It's huge. This is hugely impactful. It really is interesting. What else does the new law require?
Well, I don't know how many candidates are going to ask to see their own data, but that means that basically anything that you hold on them, if they ask for a copy of it, you have to be able to provide it.
I think I would.
I don't. I think.
Yeah. I think a lot of people
I think
would.
the one area I'm not clear on here is, and having been in recruitment for a long time, it was the old consultants always added notes to your candidate record. This guy, don't touch him with a barge pole, or this guy's a complete numpty, or for goodness sake, don't send this guy to an interview because he doesn't know how to dress, or something like that. And generally, probably in including more four-letter words. If they ask to see the notes that a consultant has added to the candidate record, I don't know if that has to be made accessible too. That's one of the areas that may need to be clarified, but it may mean that you need to be careful about what notes you're holding against the candidate record, because at any time they can ask to see it. The other point, which I think is again, which has probably been missed a little bit so far, is that any process that you put together or that you design that is intended to attract or load candidate information, so that includes websites, that includes any process, any systems whereby people are signing up to stuff, you must be able to demonstrate that it was designed with the appropriate security built in. So, I mean, what this is aimed at is if you, like a TalkTalk or anybody else who's suffered of late, loses data, you are going to have to turn around and prove that that loss was despite the fact that you did everything that is best practice in terms of securing it.
And if you miss something,
or you can be fined.
Yeah. Wow. So
well, if you haven't got the blueprints which say, we built this new system, or we built this process, and here is the process we went through to make sure that all the security was built in, to make sure that all the appropriate steps are there, then effectively you cannot prove it, and you potentially are going to get fined. And aligned to that, you basically, if there is any data breach, you have to notify both the Commissioner's Office and the affected individuals within 72 hours. So this is going back to, I think, TalkTalk were a bit of an issue. I think Michael Page had a similar one about 3 months ago. If you get hacked and they get hold of the data, you have to be able to go out to every candidate whose information has been hacked and say, sorry, Mr. Candidate, an unknown party in China is now in possession of your personal details, and you have to do that within 72 hours, which doesn't sound long, but if you've had your data hacked and it's been in some way impacted so that you can't get the email address out or something like that, how are you gonna let them know? So there's no kind of sitting on something and hoping it's going to go away. You've got to be open about it, and you've got to be able to do it. And the final one is, and this again is probably not 100% clear yet, I think it will be clearer by May, is that any inverted commas significant company, or any company doing significant numbers in terms of personal data, have to appoint a data protection officer. Now, it isn't clear whether that's every company or a company over a certain size, and they haven't set those limits, but it is likely that reasonable size recruitment businesses will have to have a designated data protection officer, who will also need to be trained and aware of all the appropriate steps that should be taken to adhere to the law.
So this person's effectively a data compliance officer enforcing these regulations internally at companies.
Pretty well, yeah.
I've got to be honest, Guy. If I was a recruitment consultant, this whole regulation law would send shivers down my spine. There's a lot of overhead here, a lot to think about, a lot to take seriously, and it's something you should start thinking about now. I know I would be, for sure. It's what should we do about it, Guy?
May 2018 sounds a long time away, but as you say, actually you need to have taken the appropriate steps and have every candidate on your database adhering to the law by May the 28th. You can't think, right, I'll start on May the 28th next year. You need to have it all done. So if you've got a candidate database with 150,000 candidates on it, that may take some time. So yes, you're absolutely right, Guy. There is potentially a lot of overhead here. So it's time to think about systems. It's time to think about automating it. It's time to think about every candidate that you add. Do we need to make sure that we are doing it right from now on, and then worrying about the historic candidates we have on our database? So in terms of what should recruiters do about it, I've broken this up into what's important now and what's important a little bit further down the track. So in terms of the sort of next 3 months, anything I think that you are doing in terms of systems and process design has got to have security measures built in now, because if you have a system or process that fails to adhere or allows data to be stolen after May the 28th, then you're going to have to go back and prove that it has had that design process gone through. So I think you need to just put that in place now. So that includes updating your project management process to make sure that the risk assessment is being done upfront before you actually roll out any of these processes or new systems. And as I say, I think gathering consent from all new candidates, the faster you get it in, the more quickly you are actually adding candidates who are effectively adhering to the law into your database. So make sure, and it's not that hard, I think, to ensure that candidates do give appropriate consent. So for instance, if you've got a website whereby people are signing up and attaching their CV, all it requires is for you to say, do you give us specific consent to hold your data? Say yes here, and then at least you've got that information. And as long as you're auditing that, you can then turn around to the commissioner if he comes calling or she comes calling. You can say, well, here you go. James Davis was added on the 27th of October 2017, and here's where James Davies, when he was on there, ticked this box or said, yes, I consent. So that's really about probably changing your candidate portal. That is going to be about changing behaviors. So you cannot, if you take data off LinkedIn, you have got to follow that up with a request to the individual to say, are you happy for us to hold that? Or you have to put it in the bin, because you're going to have to put it in the bin on May the 28th anyway. And the obvious thing then is to drive every new candidate via your portal. So if you put that consent into your portal, any candidate who rings you or contacts you in any way, you say, thanks, Mr. Candidate, that's great. Can you just go to this link and upload your CV, upload your details, tick this box, and Bob's your uncle, and you're on the database, and then we'll take it forward. So it's about changing the process. It's about making sure your portal picks it up, and there can be no pre-ticked boxes. This is one of my bugbears is as you'll know, Geese, when you go onto a website and you're signing up for a service with, I don't know, someone like BT, and it says, are you happy for BT to share your information with everybody, all and sundry? And the box is already ticked. You've actually got to untick it in order to prevent that happening. That is now going to be illegal. So if you don't tick the box, it has to default to the fact that you can't share that information. So it's now going to have to say, tick the box if you want us to share it. So it will become illegal effectively to do that. So that's just something to be aware of in your portal, effectively, if you're redesigning it.
I have to admit, I'm quite pleased about that last one there, Guy. No pre-tick boxes. I've been stung by that.
Yeah.
We've all received endless amounts of spam from God knows where because we've signed up with one service. So that's something that I can see will deliver a clear, tangible benefit to me personally. What should we do about it?
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other thing is they generally phrase it in such a way you need to read it 3 times to work out whether you should tick the box or you shouldn't tick the box in order to not share the information. They put 3 negatives in the sentence so that you can't work out which one you're supposed to tick.
It's very deceitful. Very, very deceitful practice, really, when you think about it. It's a good thing it's being outlawed.
It is.
Yeah, it's a good thing it's being outlawed. So it's not just, there's an awful bunch to think about what to do here. Gathering consent is a huge part of it. What about this appointing a data protection officer, Guy? You mentioned the limits haven't been set yet. But realistically, are we going to have to hire somebody internally, or is it just a question of training somebody internally to fulfill that role? How will that work?
I think it's training somebody internally to fulfill the role. I don't see it as being a full-time job. Having said that, I think if you're in a position that most recruitment businesses are in now, which is non-compliant, then you might actually take somebody on to do this work who then becomes your data protection officer. You could do it that way, or you could run it as a project, and at the end of it, give somebody the role internally of being data protection officer. I think if you're running a project to ensure that you are compliant as a business, part of that needs to be agreeing what that role looks like and how often you're going to review your processes, and how often you need to make sure that the appropriate boxes are ticked and that your website is compliant, and then that obviously becomes part of the DPO's role going forward. But I think once you're compliant, I think it might be a quarterly review or maybe a monthly update. So it's not going to take a lot of time from someone, but you're going to have to demonstrate you've got someone, that they are appropriately trained, and that they are doing the right things on a regular basis.
Understood. So it's not going to quite carry the cost of having another full-time employee just to manage this specific role. Well, that's probably a good thing for businesses. It's a great thing for businesses.
Absolutely. And one key role, part of that role might be, for instance, if you as a business are acquiring another business, your data protection officer would probably do a due diligence audit on the quality of the data and whether all of that information has gone through this appropriate process. And if it hasn't, you might want to check that it has been done before you start uploading their data onto your database, that sort of thing. But yes, I think typically on a day-to-day basis, it's not going to be a huge headache, but it's somebody who just needs to have that in their job description and take responsibility for getting all this stuff in.
The thought there just occurred, Guy. You mentioned buying another company and taking on their data. Data is a significant asset to a lot of different companies with models that revolve around data collection. If they don't go through this process, it's dramatically going to devalue their data, impacting the value of the company overall, right? Nobody would touch them with a barge pole if they weren't compliant with the GDPR because of all the liability it carry with it, especially if you're a big company and you've got a huge global turnover. I can see this making you
Uh,
untouchable.
Well, potentially, yes, Geese. I mean, as I say, you take on the data, you might check that all the data is now compliant, but if you buy a company and suddenly somebody makes a claim against it from 3 months ago or 6 months ago, and then the Data Protection Commission get involved, and the next minute you know that you've got a 20 million euro fine for something you didn't do because you bought a company with these liabilities hanging over it. So yes, I think it does require serious consideration, and just fixing the data doesn't mean that you're absolved from any historic issues.
You mentioned something interesting earlier. People have to prove that you've done what they ask when you ask them to delete your data and records. How would you prove you've deleted something? I mean, ensured data can be deleted on request and prove it's been done. That's a hell of a tricky one there, Guy, no, for a company to fulfill them.
It is, and of course, deleting data is anathema to any recruitment business because I spent 20 years trying to convince consultants to delete old candidates that they've never spoken to, but they won't because you never know when I'm going to need to talk to this person, even though they have no idea whether the contact details are still relevant, whether they're still alive or in this country or retired or what. So it is going to take a bit of a mindset shift to actually delete stuff. And one of the things is if you've got any candidate information on your system which does not comply, you are sensible to have deleted it by the 28th of May. And that's going to be a real one for people to get their head around. And as you mentioned, the second piece is if a candidate comes to you and says, can you delete every bit of information you hold on me? You are going to have to do that. And as you say, you're going to have to prove you do that. So that means that in IT terms, you're going to need an audit trail which shows that you have pressed the delete button and that transaction has succeeded and removed all traces of that individual. So not easy, but you need that traceability so that you can demonstrate to the commission, should they come calling, or an individual if they come calling, that all that information has gone.
Wow, what an overhead. I mean, it's something everyone's going to have to get to grips with, but ultimately something that's good for consumers and candidates overall. This next one's interesting.
Ultimately, I like with all these things, I think they are on the side of privacy without necessarily considering the effort that other businesses or that businesses managing their data are going to have to go through. So, for instance, this idea of portability, which is slightly insane to me. I mean, it makes sense if you're moving from one bank to another, you want to be able to close your account in bank A and have everything ported across to bank B and all of it to happen magically and be available and start writing checks or using your credit card the next day. And I think the banking industry is now up to speed with that. Why on earth I would ever, as a candidate of one recruitment business, ever want to be able to take all my data from one recruitment business and give it to another recruitment business just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. If I want to sign on with recruitment business B, I'll just give them my CV and on we go.
Right.
But the law includes, if I come to you as a recruiter, I say I want to delete my data, but before you do that, I want a complete download of everything you hold on me in a format where I can take it and give it to another recruitment.
Your competitor.
So that's part of potentially, yeah.
Wow. Portability in the data and how the way it's held. That's interesting. This next one, ensuring best practice security, is I think a huge point because a lot of companies out there they pay lip service to security, Guy. They probably spend more money on the flowers in lots of offices than they do on the security. It's something that now they're required to ensure is in place. Whereas before, if they were paying lip service to it, they might not have quite had these rigorous safeguards in place protecting the data they have and hold. So this is a huge point too, something that's going to be expensive to implement and bring up to speed. I'd imagine, Guy, you're the one on the ground there seeing businesses grapple with this. How are businesses dealing with this best practice security measures?
Yeah, I mean, it is about ensuring you are taking the appropriate steps and showing that you have done. So, as I sort of alluded to earlier, I think if you're going through a process of reviewing your candidate onboarding process or your candidate onboarding system or your website portal where candidates log on and upload their details, if you're making any changes to that or you're rolling out a new one, you just have to show that as part of that, you've done a complete risk assessment. So you're thinking, right, okay, I'm holding personal data in a database which is potentially accessible from a website, which instantly gives Mr. Hacker an opportunity to get in. What sensible measures should I take to prevent Mr. Hacker getting to the data? And if Mr. Hacker does get to the data, and there is no such thing as a door that is 100% shut, how do I make sure that if they get the data, they can't actually use it? So, for instance, one of the things that people storing credit card details do is they have an algorithm that converts your credit card number into something which, if somebody hacks it from a database, means nothing to them unless they know what the algorithm is, which then effectively converts those numbers. Effectively, it's encrypted according to a standard algorithm. So if they haven't got the key, then nicking that data is not actually very useful to them. Problem is, if they can get the data and the key, then you're in big trouble. So one of the things that you might, if you're using that method, you might say is, okay, well, we've put a key in, which means that it's held in data that doesn't mean anything to somebody if they steal the data, and the key is stored somewhere else where it would take forever and a day to get access to. So it's making sure that, one, you've designed that in the first place, two, that you are adhering to the processes that ensure that the key is not left in the door or whatever. And as long as you do that, it's still possible, I think, that people could steal the data and steal the key. But I think the key is the key. The underlying principle is, if you prove that you have done everything reasonable, then the commissioner is much less likely to slap a large fine on you. But it does mean that every time you go through reviewing a process or a system, you have got to have that risk assessment built in, and you have got to have it documented and show that it was done. So it is a different way of doing things, and it does mean that it may take a bit more time each time you do it. But if you build it into the methodology for doing it, it won't be a massive overhead, but it will allow you to sleep at night.
Sleep at night, indeed, Guy. Yeah, yeah. Even Google and defense contractors can get hacked, but as long as you're doing best practice, as long as you're doing what you think is the right thing, regards to protecting data, you'd be looked favorably upon by the regulator themselves, should they ever decide to come a knocking, which is the key thing there. Anything else, Guy, we should know about here? Any hidden gems that might surprise?
Yeah, I mean, those are the main points, I think. And I think if as a recruiter you've looked at those main points, taken them on board, and dealt with them, then you're pretty well there. I think there are one or two other things that are worth considering. One is holding special data, which actually requires extra consent. I'm not sure what the extra consent is. My advice to recruiters is make sure that you know what the special data is and don't touch it with a barge pole. So why, as a recruiter, I would need to hold racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, trade union membership, sexual orientation, and genetic data, I have no idea. But the key thing is know what it is and just steer clear of it, and then you don't need to worry about it. Archiving out-of-date data, that is basically data that is no longer sensibly useful. And this is it's an argument I've been having as an IT director for a long time with recruitment businesses. Don't hold candidate information that, for a candidate you haven't spoken to for 4 years, it's not any use. If you really want to reawaken that candidate, email them or phone them and get some fresh information. If neither the email nor the phone works, get rid of them, because they're just cluttering up your database. They clutter up searches, and actually, I think what's coming is that if data must be stored necessary to meet the objectives of the data subject. So if you have a candidate you haven't spoken to for 4 years, you're on extremely thin ice in terms of saying we want to find them a job. So I think the sensible thing then is to say, look, to be honest, if we haven't spoken to a candidate for N number of years, and whether that's 2 or 3 or 4, we actually remove them from the database. We might send them an email saying, we haven't spoken to you for N years. Please send us an update, and then we will re-enable you on the database. But again, it's about best practice and showing that you're doing it and showing that you're adhering to it, and you have a process for weeding out the rubbish, weeding out people who don't even know perhaps they're on your database. The other things just to consider, but I think it'll be much less of a concern, client contacts and employees are also covered by this law. So if you have a client and you have their CEO and you have their information held on your system, if that CEO moves on, you can't hold that data anymore. And if the CEO turns around and says, please don't hold my data, you actually have to be able to remove it as well. So the same applies as to a candidate. You need to be able to delete a contact and again prove that you've deleted it. Employees, similar, that's your HR system. Once an employee has left, how long can you hold the information for? Again, you should have an archiving process which says, look, I think as an employee it's sensible to hold your data for at least a year or whatever, and after that we will actually delete those records. So again, it's a best practice thing, and making sure you have a process and making sure you're showing that you're doing it. Concern for software vendors, this doesn't really apply to recruitment businesses, but if you're taking on new software, if you're buying into a new CRM, you need to ask questions of your software vendors to make sure that they have data protection built into their system. So if you're going software as a service, for instance, and your candidate data is being held by a vendor in their data center, that's still your responsibility should it be stolen. So you need to make sure that your vendors are taking appropriate steps and that you can prove that you've asked those questions and that the vendors have answered them successfully. So if you're going through a CRM review, you're choosing a new CRM, that should be built into your proposal, and you should make sure you've got the right answers from them. Pseudonymization is one of the buzzwords that seems to have come out of this. I've got no real understanding of what it means and why it's different from encryption. Actually, what it means is really look at holding the data in a way that you cannot actually take it back or link it back to an individual. So if you're holding data about an individual, but there's no name in there, there's nothing that actually identifies that individual, and that includes online IDs because those are now covered, then that is deemed as effectively not personal information. I don't understand how CRM is ever going to work if you haven't got information about their name or their phone number or whatever it is. But encryption might be an answer. And as I mentioned earlier with a credit card, you might look at, or you might talk to vendors about, is it worth encrypting the data so that if somebody gets in the back end, steals the data, it's no use to them unless they have a way of unencrypting it. So those are things that are maybe worth looking at. Certainly, if you're holding any information like credit card details, you should be using a process like that, because if you lose it, then it'll be all over the press. So those are just things, I think, around the edges that are worth thinking of. And I think the archiving one is something that your data protection officer should be overseeing and should be making sure is being done on a regular basis.
I think it's great there's more rigorous expectations around software vendors. There's a lot of them out there producing very niche pieces of software that is first and foremost built to get the job done, fulfill the function that the software has, whatever that function may be. And very rarely do they build security from the ground up by default and by design. So to me, that's a fantastic plus for all these little independent software vendor shops out there that could be building pieces of software for the recruitment industry. They have to pull their socks up, but that can only be good for recruiters. So to me, that's a huge positive there coming out.
I agree with that, Guy. I mean, the gotcha here, of course, is if they fail to do it and your data that you're holding for your candidates is stolen, you're going to be the one that's fined, not the vendor.
Interesting.
So in purely commercial terms, the vendor couldn't care less. Because it's not their data, it's yours, and you're the one who's got consent to hold it and look after it. So it's your responsibility, but it's up to you to make sure that the vendor is adhering, because and you have to apply that before you take that vendor on, because once you're using that CRM, It's not their problem, it's yours. So you need to understand what risks you're taking and go through a risk review as part of your CRM, taking on the CRM and demonstrating you've done that. Because if you don't, then you're going to be the one holding the bill for 20 million euros.
20 million euros. That figure, Guy, just sticks in the head, doesn't it? Wow. This is a huge subject, Guy. We've covered a lot in this webcast today, but we will be publishing this webcast so it's on demand, and with it, an article detailing the key points we've covered today and the key steps we think you should be taking and the key ideas and issues you need to be aware of. We'll be publishing this, Guy, as always, over at the Nastarian, the Nastar's blog. You can find us at blog.nastar.com. If anybody does have any questions, and I'm sure, Guy, people will, we have covered a lot. We've tried to be as detailed and in-depth as we can, but it's such a big regulation that covers such a diverse set of practices and processes that people watching will undoubtedly have some questions. So, Guy, if they do, you're available. They can get in touch, get some immediate answers from you by reaching out to us using those contact details on screen. Thank you very much, Guy, for your time today. That was really helpful. I started off this conversation by saying, what's a hairy subject? It really is a hairy subject, but something that businesses have to be aware of, have to be acting on now, and that carries serious consequences for them if they don't. It's a huge subject, guys. So it's something we'll be publicising and talking about more as May approaches. Thank you for your time today, Guy. Do you have anything else to add you'd like the listeners and readers to know about out there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's. I think the key is not to panic, but it is important to start looking at this and start working on it and start thinking about it now, because if you put it off another year, then it might be time to panic. So get your heads around it, understand what you need to do, make sure that you're going through the right processes, get somebody to oversee it. Probably even if they're not a data protection officer, get somebody who takes responsibility for it in the business. Get your processes in place nice and early, and it won't be a big problem. If you leave it for another year, it will become a major, major issue.
So don't panic. Get in touch with any questions and contact Nastar if you need any help with this subject. We'd be delighted to help you through this. Thank you, Guy. We'll be talking to you again next time.
Thanks, Keith.
And thank you for watching, everybody.
Right.
Follow us at Nastar on Twitter for any updates on webcasts we'll be publishing in the future. Thank you. Have a good day.